Okay. All right. So I'll just get started. Let me start by saying thank you to everybody for coming for this seminar. I think my goal in doing this is sort of to help all of us focus on the things we need to do for 2021. So how did I get started thinking about this? I think so. It was when I started planning for my own year in 2021 that all of a sudden it occurred to me that some of the things that I know and some of the things that seem to be natural to me that I do that have helped me to be successful in some of the things I've done, that it seems like they're not quite as well known to everybody. So it may be a good idea to sort of put together a seminar like this that would help people just think a bit more strategically about their plans for the coming year. So as we just come together, I hope you learn something, and I hope it's worthwhile for you. Thank you so much. So let's go. Let's get started. My name is Tayo Oyedeji. I'm the chief executive officer at Overwood. Overwood is a firm that democratizes investments by making safe, high yield investments accessible to Africans. I think what we try to do primarily, in our view, there are two big problems with investment in Africa. The first, obviously, is accessibility. So if you're in Lagos or you're in Accra or you're in Nairobi or you're in Johannesburg, you've got multiple options for investments. But what happens if you're in Kusumu or Lokoja or Takoradi or in other parts of Africa where you don't have as many options? And so what happens when people don't have options is they take whatever is accessible to them. And so that leads to the second problem, which is safety of funds. So what we try to do at Overwood is to solve both problems by giving people access to safe, first of all, safe, high yield investments. How are we different from others? We're very conservative. That means that we focus primarily on the safety of your fund. So I can tell you that you probably never get a 20% interest rate at Overwood. But I can also promise you that as long as God is alive, that your funds will be safe. So when you need your money, you'd always get it. Why is this important? People that save with us usually are family people, people that have things to do with the money. They're not looking for a quick deal. They're hoping to use the money to pay for school fees, to pay for a bunch of other things that are very important to them. So we don't play games. We don't take risk with the funds. We're very, very conservative. You get good rates on a daily basis, but more importantly, we're focused on the safety of funds. All right, let's get into one thing. There are five key elements of this presentation, and I'll walk each one of us through all five of them. First, I'll start with three questions that I think are extremely important in the way we think about our lives in general. Then I'll focus on the three key elements of the one thing philosophy, which is the fulcrum, the goal, and the execution. And then I'll close with three stories about how I have used these things in my own life. So that's basically it. So these are the three key questions that I think every single life needs to be able to answer if it's going to be significant. The first is, who are you? The second is, where are you going? And then the third and equally important is, how will you get there? Right? In my view, we don't spend enough time to think about these three questions in our lives. Because unless we know the answer to these things, we're just running around without a solution. There was a saying I read that I found very, very inspirational. The guy basically said, if you don't have a goal, if you don't know where you're going or who you are, it's like playing a football game without a goalpost. Think about it, playing a football game without a goalpost. So many of us, we live, we have children, we live, we go to work, we do all these things, and then we die. And that's it. But the key questions of who you are, where you're going, and how you get there while you're in this world, we don't seem to have good answers to it. So let me start with who you are. Talking about Aristotle, he said, knowing yourself is the beginning of wisdom. So how do you know yourself? I think some of the things we need to focus first of all on are, What are the things that are important to you? What are the things that are important to you as a person? What are the things that you're passionate about? What are the things that come naturally to you, that you're naturally good at? What are the things that people look at you and they say, oh, can you help me with this? Not because I can't do it, but because I think you are just better at it. Right? So we first of all need to start with a self-audit of who we are and the natural gifts and talents that we have. I remember when I think it was like 2001 when I did this. That's about almost 20 years ago now. And one of the things that I found about myself is that I'm naturally good at academics. It took me a while to discover that. Like, I don't have to struggle as hard as some people do with academics for me to do well in terms of education and things like that. And so I said to myself, if that is what God has blessed me with, then I must maximize that skill or that talent or that gift that God has given me. And so that means I'm going all the way to study all the way up to PhD level, right? I have a sister that is just naturally good at organizing, right? Like she's really, really good at saying, of course, it started with parties. So somebody's wedding, somebody's birthday, whatever it is that needs to be organized. She puts a list together, she gets people going, and before you know it, everything works perfectly. And so that's a natural gift that she has. And in knowing who you are, you first of all need to identify the natural gifts that God has given you. And then sit down and say, how do I maximize these gifts in my life? Right? The second one is, where are you going? Lao Tzu, a great Chinese philosopher, said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. But the key question you have to answer before we even get into the one thing is, where are you going with your life? What are the things that are important to you in terms of direction? What direction do you want to take your life? Now, let me tell you something about life. If you don't direct life, life is going to direct you. Let me say that again. If you don't tell life where you want to go, you will just find out that life will keep directing you and telling you where to go. And so you find out that, well, it's time to get married. Somebody comes along and you just get married. Let me tell you a story about marriage because I think it's very, very influential. When I think I was 23, 24 or so, and I wanted to get, and I was dating. Oh my God, I'm about to get myself in trouble. But I'll tell the story anyway. Yeah. I was dating this wonderful girl, and we're still friends, by the way. And one day we went out on a date, and we're talking about where we're going with our lives, right? And she sat down and told me everything that she wants to be, and where she wants to go, and how she wants to achieve it. And I remembered as we were having that conversation, I said, my direction in life is exactly the opposite of yours. Like everything you've told me so far is exactly what I don't want out of life. And that relationship ended within a couple of months. It wasn't immediate. But as we held that conversation about where we're going, it became clear to both of us that we're going in different directions. And so we couldn't travel together. But if you don't know where you are going, then anything that comes along your way seems good, seems okay. And I'll speak a bit more closely about this as we proceed along the way. And then the final one is, how will you get there? How will you get where you're going? What are the plans you need to put in place? What are the objectives you need to put in place? What are the things you need to do on a daily basis to get you where you're going? And so even before we get into this, even before we get into the one thing, I think it's important that each one of us, before we start even thinking and planning for next year, we first answer those three questions. Who are you? Where are you going? And how will you get there? Now let's move into the one thing. So it's only after answering those three questions that you are then able to say, now that I have an idea of who I am, I know where I'm going, and I know how I plan to get there. Now is a good time to then say that we have a block of time in a full year 2021. How will I use this block of time to help me achieve the things that I want to achieve? And there are three key drivers of this one thing philosophy. Um, it wasn't this clear when I was doing it, and I'll talk to you about how I did it. But with time, I began to sort of put them in different conceptual boxes so that it would help all of us as we move forward. Okay, so the first is the fulcrum, and I'll speak a bit about this, and then the goals, and then execution or how to execute. So let's start with the fulcrum. Let me just first of all say, I'm sure we all know what a fulcrum is. So you've got a red in the image on your left hand, you've got a red box, a blue box, and you've got a fulcrum in the middle. And so what this enables you to do is that by putting the fulcrum at the right place, you're able to lift weights or do things that you couldn't ordinarily do, right? And so the fulcrum is the one thing that enables you to sort of do things that you can't do in your natural abilities by putting a few other things in place. And I'll talk to you about it. So this wonderful gentleman called Archimedes was a Greek philosopher from back in the days. And he said something. He said, give me a lever and give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth. If you give me a fulcrum, I will move the world. When you think about this, the way to think about this is, what is the one thing that if you make it happen in 2021, it will completely change your life and move you closer to the direction you want to go? So remember, that's why we started with who are you, where are you going, and how will you get there? If you don't have those answers, it's tough to know the fulcrum that will move you there, right? Who are you, where are you going, how do you plan to get there? Then ask this very, very crucial question. What is the one thing that if I do and achieve next year will help move me closest to the direction I want to go in my life? And there are three key forces that will help us as we think about this. The first is distance. So that's what that first question addressed. What will move you closest to your destination? Move you closest to your destination. The second one is, what can you achieve that will exert the most force for good in your life, that will move you forward the most and have a strong positive force in your life? And then perhaps more importantly, what is the one thing that if I achieve can be a catalyst that will make other things work effectively in my life? I could go on and on and on about this, but if you get this right, it just makes the next year a lot easier. Because while everybody is busy building 1 million resolutions, 1,000 things that I want to change, you can easily look for that one thing that would exert the force to move you closer in terms of distance, and then have a domino effect on other things that you want in your life. I remember the first time that I did this, I believe it was in 1999, right? I had finished from college about a year, from university about a year earlier, and I had gotten a job, and I was a young banking officer. I was working in financial services. And then I remembered that back in those days, my biggest struggle was just never having enough money to do the things I wanted to do. And I wanted to solve that problem because, in my view, if I could solve at least to a large extent that money problem, a lot of the other things that I needed to do will be able to work. So remember again, who are you, what are you, where are you going, and how do you plan to get there? So the goal I made for that year in 1999 was, I was going to write a book. It sounded ridiculous. Like, what experience do I have? What do I know? But I said I was going to write a book, and I would launch and sell the book. And doing that would give me the funds I needed to have a slightly better life than what I was living. Believe me, it happened. Because then I focused all of 1999 on writing that book. The year 2000, I released the book. Used the proceeds from that book to buy a car because that was what I needed the most. And then everything else flowed in that direction. And so this was where it started from, saying, what is the one thing that would move me closer to my direction, that would be a force for good, and perhaps more importantly, cascade into other things that will help me be more effective. And I'll tell you a couple of other stories about how I think about this as we move forward. The next part of it, there are three parts, remember, is goal setting. And I love Denzel, and I love what he said. Denzel said, dreams without goals remain dreams, right? So if you know that one thing and you just don't put goals in mind or in place to help you achieve it, it becomes really, really difficult to achieve. So this is how I think about this. Now that I know the one thing that I need to change in 2021, what are the goals that I'll put in place for the year, for each month, for each week, and even each day? Let me tell you how that goal worked for me in 1999, right? So I was working in a place that required me. I was living with my sister, with another one of my sister, quite a few, about 2 hours in public transportation from work, right? And I was working, if you know Lagos, I was living in Aja or Lekki, and I was working in Ikeja. So what it meant was that I had to take public transport that took me almost 2 hours to work and another 2 hours back from work, right? And so the goal was set. I was going to write this book, regardless of what happened. And so what I did was I would get home, I'll close from work maybe at about 7, get home at about 9. But then I would force myself to write between 9 and 11 or 12 because I had a goal. And that goal had to become a weekly goal, a monthly goal, and a daily goal. So I'll force myself to write, and then the next day I'll wake up at 5 o'clock again and be gone. What that meant was, now this is the key, it meant sacrifice. So thinking about the goal or the things that you want to do, the question is not what do you want to do? The question is what are you willing to give up to achieve what you want to do? Right? For me, it meant giving up a lot of sleep back in those days. Right? And in other things, it also meant giving up other things. And when I get to the stories, I'll tell you a bit more about them. But what do you need to give up? For some of you, it may mean giving up 4 or 5 hours of watching Premier League on TV. Aha! The guys that are listening are like, oh, don't go there, right? I know, we all love it. We all love to watch football. But if you watch 4 games, that's about 8 hours. It's amazing what you can do with 8 hours if you push it towards your goal, right? The other thing that's crucial is when will I achieve this goal? 99 meant that I had to finish that book before the end of the year, because otherwise I was going to be spending 4 or 5 hours a day in public transportation every day because I wouldn't be able to afford a car on my salary, right? And then, most importantly, what do I need to learn to achieve this goal? In my case, that year, it meant learning to write, not to write fiction and non-fiction, because it was going to be a fictional book that had a non-fiction element. It meant learning some new things. It meant buying a computer even when I couldn't really afford one. And so basically what I'm saying is, it really isn't about so much about the one thing that is important to you. It is more about what you need to do to get it done, to achieve it. What do you need to give up? What do you need to give up? What do you need to give up? Right? We could go through this entire thing and nothing changes unless you resolve this part of it. Like if you're able to do the first part of identifying who you are, where you want to go, and how you want to get there, you're able to know the one thing that will move you closest towards that. Nothing happens until you begin to make sacrifices, until you begin to give up things. Let me tell you one of the hardest sacrifices I ever had to make in my life. The year was 2017. I was the regional managing director of Stockholm Mediaverse Group in South Africa. It was a really, really good job. I was very well paid. I loved South Africa. I loved the people. I loved Johannesburg. I was living in Branston, a really, really nice part of South Africa. But the more I stayed in South Africa, the farther my family seemed from me because my family was living in America. Now, let me tell you how this makes sense to you. Let me make sense of this to you. Now, I have a deal with British Airways, so I always take British Airways to when I'm traveling. So living in Johannesburg meant I'll take a 10-hour flight from Johannesburg to London. I have a 6 or 7 hour layover in London, and then take a flight another 7 hours or so to Chicago before driving 3 hours to Madison to be with my family. So every single time I wanted to see my family, it meant about 24 to 27 hours on the road. And so what do you think began to happen? It was really, really difficult. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to go see them anymore. And as the distance between my family and I increased, it occurred to me that if being in the lives of my children is important to me, I had to give up something. I had to give up the best job I ever had in my life. I had to give up something that was so important to me. The possibility of rising through the corporate rank to become a global strategy director or a global vice president or a global executive, the possibility of a million and one other things. Well, so the one thing in 2017 was giving up a corporate career so that I could spend more time with my family. So sometimes we make it seem like it's just about work, it's about doing more. Your one thing next year could be, how do I give more time to my family? Right. Oh, now here's the hard part. Execution. Execution. Peterson said, if you fulfill your obligations every day, you don't need to worry about the future. What he was basically saying is that, right, if you do the things you're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis, at the end of the year, you find that it's easy to achieve that goal that you set at the beginning of the year. So I think where we started from was, right, don't set a million and one goals for 2021. Find the one thing that's like a fulcrum that will help you move the other things in your life in the right direction. Set a goal towards it. And then the last part of it is execute like crazy. Do what you need to do to be effective in the things that are important to you. Right? So talking about execution, and I think my slides got mixed up, but I'll speak to it. So talking about execution, I think the most important part of execution is to ask, what are the things that I need to do every day to get me towards this goal that I've set, or this objective that I've set in the first place? So what are the things that need to change every day, and how do I execute to make the goals that I've set work and be effective? And I'll walk you through some of these things. All I know is myself. So I can just use myself as an example to walk you through. So I'll talk to you about 3 different stories and how those 3 different stories basically worked in my own life as far as one thing is concerned per year. So the year was 2003. And I remember my daughter saw this yesterday and said, Dad, how old were you here? I was 26 or so, yeah. So I was actually much younger then. And I remembered my goal that year. Remember we had started from who are you, where are you going, and how will you achieve it? And also, most importantly, what are the gifts that you have that God has given you? And then how do you maximize it? So my goal that year was to start the journey towards achieving that thing that I had said as far as education is concerned. So I knew I needed a master's degree and I wanted a PhD. So 2003 was the year that I said, this year I'm going to achieve this. But I didn't know what to do, right? So this was the end of 2002. And then I was still working in banking. And then my friend that used to work right beside me, his name is Demola. He's now in Houston, really good guy. One day he came to the office and he resigned. And I was like, Demola, what are you doing? Are you going to another bank? Do you have another job? What's going on? And he said, no, I don't have another job. I'm going to study abroad. I'm going for my master's degree. And that was really, really weird. Here is why that was weird. I knew Demola's family. It's just like my family. Back in those days, only children of rich people could afford to go abroad for master's degree. At least that was what I knew. So I didn't think it was a thing that could happen to me. Like I could go to America for a master's. Do you have any idea how much that costs? Right? My mom was a school teacher, right? So the fulcrum that would change the rest of my life as far as I was concerned in 2003 was to find a way to go abroad for my master's and eventually my PhD. That was what I decided. So when Demola did it, all of a sudden I was like, dude, you have to sit me down and walk me through every single thing you did, because that is the direction I want to go. So Demola said, well, the key thing was I studied for the GRE. I wrote my application. I did very well in the GRE. And then all of a sudden, I got a scholarship. So don't worry, I didn't have to pay for it. And that's the only reason I'm going abroad. So I said, Demola, please write everything down. So he wrote it down. And you know what I did? That was my one thing for 2013. I wasn't going to do anything else. I wasn't starting any business. I wasn't writing any book. I wasn't doing anything. I was just going to follow Demola's blueprint so that that one fulcrum in my life will lead to a different a different destiny, pretty much, right? So now this is where execution becomes important. So we already identified the fulcrum, right? We already know the goal. Now, execution is what you do every single day. Now, remember, by this time I had already bought my car, but by then I had moved into another company where I had to work till almost 9 p.m. every day and then drive back home. So I'll get home at about 10 and then study for the GRE between 10 and about 1 a.m. in the morning. 3 hours every day for 6 months. 3 hours every day for 6 months, 10 to 1, every day for 6 months. And then what would then happen is I would have to wake up again early in the morning. So I get about 4 or 5 hours of sleep, go to work, do everything that I need there to be done, come back home, 10 to 1 a.m. every day, non-stop. Study again. Because as far as I knew, if I did well enough on the GRE, somebody will look at me and say, let's give this African boy a scholarship so that he can come study. And sure enough, that was exactly what happened. 2 years master's, 3 years PhD. I never paid a dime, not one kobo for tuition. Some nice white person, God bless his soul, puts a foundation together that says, find the smartest and brightest person from all over the world, bring them to this school, and let them study, even if they can't afford to. And so even though I couldn't afford to, because I identified that goal in 2013, worked hard towards it, achieved some of those things, I was able to get the objective done. Now, story 2 was 2010, talking about goals, plans, and objectives again. My daughter was born in 2008. Absolutely beautiful girl. First child, where everybody's crazy about their first children. If you don't understand, ask any father or mother. first child. So I remembered we were living in America then. I'd finished my PhD. I was an assistant professor at the University of Georgia. I was paid, but I wasn't terribly well paid. I was paid enough for us to live a comfortable life. So I remembered we had gone to a daycare to enroll my daughter. So to do that, we had gone to about 5 or 6 daycares until we got to one, the one I really, really loved. I'll never forget his name. His name was Goddard School of Children or something like that. Goddard, Gordard. And I loved it so much because just had a really, really good environment. But when they told me the monthly price to put my daughter there, I was so sad because I knew I couldn't afford to. Right? By the time we take my salary, take out all the expenses, we wouldn't have enough money to put my daughter there. So this was 2009. And I remember leaving Goddard and we took my daughter to a second daycare. And I said, right as I was dropping her off, I said, I don't want to make this decision for my daughter for the rest of my life. I don't want to, for the rest of my life, say she can't get this because I can't afford it. That I want to be in a place where I'll be able to afford anything that she wants, anything that she needs. I thought education was a need, a core need in that regard. And so I got home that day and said, I'm leaving academia. I'm moving back to the corporate world. And I'll try to make a lot more money by moving to the corporate world. So that was the goal for 2010. What did that mean? That meant planning a career change from going from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor to thinking what's the fastest way to becoming the CEO of a company. So I began to do the research and it became clear that you had to go get an MBA because the PhD is an academic degree. The MBA is a practitioner's degree. My goal was actually to get the MBA and come back to America, but eventually I went to Oxford, got the MBA, 2010, came back to Nigeria, and that began another side of my story, right? And so, again, for that 1 year, the only thing I was focused on was how do I leave this current job to move into another job? And what are the things I need to do? So that fulcrum of leaving academia to move into corporates literally changed everything else again. And I find that changed everything else interesting again. Yeah. And then the third story was in 2019. I'd left Johannesburg and moved back to Nigeria. And I've always been interested in finance. And I knew that obviously I couldn't afford to buy a banking license, right? But I could afford to put together a fintech firm. That's a financial technology firm, right? So I knew finance. I've done quite a few years in finance. So I knew finance, but I didn't know technology as well as I knew finance, right? But if it's going to be a fintech firm, then it had to be a combination of finance and technology. So in 2018, I remember it was about September, October 2018. I was making plans for 2019. And I remember thinking that 2019 is the year that I'll become really good at tech. So that in 2020, I could start Overwood. So in 2019, I actually enrolled for a tech school where I learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and a couple of other things. I began to study really hard at home, building the competencies in technology to match with my competencies in finance so that we could build a really good firm that will be effective and successful as Overwood has been. So when people think that like some things they just happened. No. We spent almost 15 months preparing to launch Overwood. Even before we launched, we've spent 15 months. And I remembered in March of 2019, while I was in class and they were talking to us about technology, one of the things that I learned actually changed the entire direction of the plan of the firm. Because initially we're going to build an advisory firm, right, that is enabled by fintech. But the more we looked at it in that class, it became clear to me that I was going to be a fintech firm, a pure play fintech firm, rather than a financial advisory firm. And so what you see as I'm saying all these things is that I'm not just telling you theory. It's things that I do in my own life and in my own case on a day-to-day basis. I sit down and I say, this next year that is coming, what is the one thing that I want to achieve? What is the one thing that I'm going to focus all my energy towards achieving? Because if I achieve that one thing, it will help me do a few more other things. Let me give you an example for next year. In planning for next year, and I'll say this because it hasn't happened yet. I say things like 4 5 years ahead of time, and people, when it starts happening, they find it interesting. I've been saying for a long time that I wanted to get involved politically, or at least in policy in Nigeria, right? So my one thing next year is to explore different ways of being involved in making changes that will help people, starting from Nigeria and moving into Africa. So for me, politics is not a way to gain power, or policy. That's why I've been changing my thought from politics to policy. So I'm not as interested in politics. I'm more interested in policy. Policy, in my view, is a way to make life better and easier for people. And so my one thing next year is to look more closely at policy and how I could be a part of policy that helps people in Nigeria and eventually in the rest of Africa, right? So that's the one thing for me for next year. As part of that one thing, I've begun to set goals, right? I've begun to set objectives. I've begun to think about ways to execute some of those goals. Like one of the goals, for instance, is I need to move closer to my grassroots, right? And you see that begin to happen. So one of the things we're planning to do is to move some of the back end in Overwood to some other places where people really need work, and the demand is not, I mean, the supply is high, but the demand is not quite as high. So I mean, like, a lot of things will begin to change in view of that one thing, and you begin to see the implementation. So here's what I want to close with as we think about this model and this whatever and this principle. Ask yourself again, if you know that this is where you're going, right? In view of knowing who you are, and you know the direction you want to take your life towards. What's the one thing? What's the one thing that will make a big difference if you're able to achieve it in 2021? Then devote that entire year towards it, and you'll be shocked the power of focused thoughts and processes. The problem with many of us is that we're chasing too many things. We have too many goals, too many objectives, so many things that we're chasing. But nobody becomes successful by chasing one thing. I'm not much of a preacher, but I can tell you that, I mean, at least I go to church, I study the Bible, and the one Jesus said, I have come just for one thing, so that people may have life and have it more abundantly. At least that's in my own Bible. Like, so I'm not much for bringing religious things into this, but I know that a lot of people are very, very religious. And they're thinking, oh, you didn't even talk about anything about my way of making sense of life, because religion helps a lot of people make sense of life. But think about it. He clearly said, I've come to achieve just one thing, so that people may have life and have overflowing life. Right? If you look at Martin Luther King, he basically said, I have just one thing in mind, and that is to help African Americans to become equal with their oppressors back in those days, which was a bunch of white people. If you think about Gandhi, Gandhi's entire goal was independence for India. Mother Teresa had only one goal, helping poor people, and that's all I'm going to commit my life to. Now let me bring it to the business world, and I find this absolutely fascinating. Bill Gates for me has always been a role model. I sort of love the guy. Like a lot of people in my field love Steve Jobs, but I love Bill Gates more because I just love the way he thinks about life and the way he thinks about things. All through his business life, he ran just one business, focused on one thing, making computers easier for people to use, Microsoft. When he left Microsoft, he set up Bill Gates Foundation, focused on only one thing, solving the most difficult problems that people have. And he identified that the biggest problem that people have is healthcare, and that the best way to solve healthcare problems is by making vaccines accessible to people. When he first said that he was going to eradicate polio in the world, nobody believed it. Like polio has been with us forever. Well, polio may no longer be in the West, but in Nigeria, I mean, we all see the beggars. In Africa, we see the beggars on the streets. Their legs are gone, taken by polio, right? Bill Gates put that one goal as number one thing that he wanted to achieve. Nothing else. Until polio was eradicated, he wasn't going to do anything else. Focused on it 100%. And believe it or not, today, polio is history. Totally eradicated from the world. And so the question I'm asking you is, let's think big. Let's let's be strategic. Let's not dissipate energy in chasing a million and one things. Just think about what is the one thing that can help you move towards your desired direction. Thank you so much for giving me your time. I hope this has been worthwhile for you. Um, it's been great for me. I've actually enjoyed doing this. It's taken me out of you know some of the things that I had to do that are more business oriented, to focus a bit more on just helping people see how they can be a bit more effective and efficient with their lives. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your life. Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year. Bye.